Hello and welcome everyone for this evening, this board meeting. If we can, is the chaplain here to open us with an invocation?
Good evening. Would you join me in prayer? Creator God, as we gather this evening, we do that for many reasons. In light of our calling to fulfill the urgings of our heart, we ask for your guidance during this meeting. There are many gifts in this room that reflect your ongoing work in this world. God, I pray your blessings on the people with vision who can dream dreams where others can heal the world in our community who have deep hurts and constant pain. God, I pray your blessings on the organizers and leaders whose gifts are to see talents in others and bring people together in ways that bring new life and energy to old and familiar systems. God, I pray your blessings on the minders of details, the people whose gifts help us to be responsible stewards of our precious and limited resources. Use all these gifts in a way that will bring healing to our city and beyond. As we're together, we come as friends with common purpose. Though there is business to be conducted, we acknowledge our concerns. For the hurts that each of us know with our family members, we pray for your Spirit's presence in each situation that will bring strength and healing needed for the day. For the patients in this hospital, we pray for the wisdom and clarity needed by the skilled professionals who provide their care. We remember our patients to you this evening and all those who are sick so that they might find healing and wholeness. And God, there's an empty seat at the table this evening as we have celebrated Tom Ed Wilson's life and the contribution he made to Erlanger and our dream of a children's hospital in the city of Chattanooga. We remember to you this family. I remember to you the board members who will miss his presence in their lives. God, allow your holy and healing your healing spirit to be present with Tom's family and his friends, as well as these board members. Allow the stories they shared about Tom, the legacy he lived to make our world a better place, and the faith we share be the healing needed for our grief. And God, for the people of this world whose lives have been touched by violence of terrorism and war, we have a special connection. Just as unexplainable as the horror of bombs that are meant to create a world of nightmares, allow the strength of the human spirit through collective acceptance, justice seeking, patience, kindness, and love prove stronger and more resilient than any evil used to create hate and fear. For these things we pray. Amen. Amen.
Everyone has in front of them the agenda for the evening, and I appreciate the chaplain's kind words, but I personally I think it's appropriate at where we usually introduce guests to remember that one of ours is not with us tonight. I know we all enjoyed and we're honored to be able to work side by side with Tom Ed, and we'll miss him greatly. And thank you to everyone else who's with us tonight to continue the work that we carry on. Along those lines, I do have I wouldn't necessarily call it special, but some business that we do need to take care of. Our board is missing Tom Ed, but we're also missing Rick Youngblood. He has moved on to other endeavors that take him out of the community, and he's no longer able to be on the board with us. And as a point of detail, he was our vice chairman on the board, and after conversation with Mike Griffin, I'd like to suggest to my fellow board members, Mike has been vice chair before, and is one of our longest standing members. He's been with us for 6 years, so I would like to see if everyone would be interested and be with me in suggesting that we ask Mike to serve as our vice chair going forward until we hit November and do this again. So I I'd entertain a motion or a second on that, if anybody has any commentary. That's my suggestion at this point.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you for your willingness to serve, Mike. We have the minutes from our April meeting that we need to review and approve. Hopefully, been able to look them over. I personally think Kitty did a wonderful job putting them together. She always does. And if we want to have a motion and approval of the minutes from our last meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We'll move on to committee and subcommittee reports. Mr. Haas, did budget and finance meet?
We do have several things that are going to be brought up tonight. Other than that, they're on the agenda. I don't have a-
Thank you. Dr. Sizemore, joint conference.
The joint conference met in May. We did not meet this month. No report.
Thank you, sir. Planning committee did not meet this month, to my knowledge. Is that correct? Thank you. Mr. Griffin, the audit and compliance?
Did not meet.
Mr. Webb, did legal committee meet?
Did not.
Ms. Stanley, manager board?
We met twice, once in May and once in June, and we do have a matter on the agenda tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. The executive committee did meet. In normal course of business, I think all the items on the agenda cover what we covered perfectly, so we'll see those. Do we have any other unfinished business before we move to the consent calendar? Okay, we have one item on the consent calendar, which I will now entertain a motion to move that forward.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of approving the consent calendar for tonight?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you very much. Mr. Tabor, we have a resolution authorizing and approving the sale of certain pharmacy operations, which I will let you, he needs more time, I'll read the whole thing. Erlanger Pharmacies, Inc., a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chattanooga and Hamilton County Hospital.
We tried to make the titles long.
Yeah, thank you, give you time to walk.
This resolution authorizes Erlanger to sell the Erlanger Pharmacies, Inc. That's our retail division of our pharmacy. Currently, we have 4 locations, one in the Medical Mall, one at Erlanger East, one at Erlanger North, and then one at Carlson Avenue. The sale is to CVS for $10 million. $8.5 million will go to Continue Care for the asset sale. $1 million will cover the inventory that they're buying, and then $500,000 to Erlanger Hospital for a non-compete. This sale will actually allow our patients and our employees better access to the pharmacy. We'll have, there's several stores, including the Medical Mall and the Dodson Avenue, that will offer the Erlanger benefit. One will be in the Hickson area, one in the East Brainerd area, Gun Barrel, and one in Port Oakland. So our employees will actually, and 2 of those stores are 24/7. CVS also will in the future have the capability to do mail order, which currently our Erlanger pharmacies do not have. This is a move in the direction of partnering with CVS for population health and other exciting things to come. We feel this is a very good price and will actually enhance the current benefit for our employees and our patients.
How does this affect our 340B program?
It does not. In fact, CVS, once the sale goes through, they will be considered a contracted pharmacy. So they will still be doing that, and Erlanger Hospital still will have the savings from the 340B program. We have a similar contract with Walmart for that same 340B savings.
Walgreens.
Thank you. Thank you for that correction.
And what is that on average per year savings?
The total savings, I don't have it broken up by the contract pharmacies.
No, I mean on the prescription. You said that we would still get that back.
Yeah, it's about, for the contracted Erlanger Pharmacies, I think it's about probably $5.5 million.
But you were also correct. We are in negotiations with Walmart and Publix.
Yes.
to expand the footprint of 340B pharmacies.
When do you anticipate this contract, this sale will take place?
Tomorrow.
When will the money be in the bank?
Tomorrow.
Does that mean your approval?
That's a very
I just
important
wanted to make
question.
sure everybody knows that.
This will be tomorrow.
Any other questions? Motion. Entertain a motion for the
Yeah,
board.
motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve is presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Let Henry have it. All in favor of approving this resolution?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you, Mr. Tabor.
Yes, I do want to thank the staff at Continue Care that helped me with this transaction. They did tremendous work on getting all the Ts crossed and Is dotted and working with CVS to ensure a smooth transition for tomorrow. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, all of the team that was involved. Now, the next resolution are our budget for fiscal year 2017-2018.
Yes, I'm pleased to present the 2017-2018 capital and operating budget for the upcoming year. As you recall, we spent 2 Budget and Finance Committee meetings reviewing the detail of the budget. We also had 2 lunch and learn sessions for our board members to dive into some of the detail. The budget has also been reviewed by the Financial Review Committee, which I think, Mr. Chairman, you have a copy of their letter supporting the affirmation of the budget. The budget for next year is a $5 million bottom line. As we have mentioned in the past, this budget does include some of the Epic costs that we're currently running, both the Epic system and the old Siemens system. It also includes the cost of the Go Live, which is slated for November 1. So those costs have been in there, and even though it's going to be a challenging budget, I think the group of managers that you see in this room will be able to accomplish our goals and meet. And our goal is to obviously exceed the budget. It does have a 10% growth rate in there. A lot of that has to do with the full year of East, but it does have some of our Heart and Lung Institute coming on board in the early spring, and some of our other strategic initiatives that we have in place. The resolution also has the minimum pension contribution for 2018, which would be $6.6 million. We will divide that equally by the 12 months. This is based on the actuarial recommendation about our funding of our pension plan. The budget also includes the capital budget for next year, which but the biggest portion of that has to do with the Epic, which is the final third payment involved in the Epic system. And then the next largest one, the $4.1 million, is for the Heart and Lung Institute, which will have a final total project of $16 million cost for the Heart and Lung Institute. The rest of the items are either replacement or strategic purchases that we need to deliver on the volumes in the budget.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to bring to your attention that, as I do every year, that approving this budget approves the capital budget, and we no longer have to bring each item back.
Correct. I want to commend and thank the management team for making this process as transparent as possible, and also thank my board members that took the opportunity to go to the lunch and learns and dig into this. This is sort of the guiding document for the year, and we need to make sure that we have plenty of time to digest it. I think we got that opportunity this year, so thank you for that.
Thank you for your time, because I know that it takes a lot of time out of your busy schedule to, we had a very active discussion and very positive outcomes, and hopefully you feel that we've been extremely transparent in all the assumptions and projections.
I would ask of all of our board members that are here, I know it's easy to ask the questions then and not ask the questions now. If there were any pertinent or interesting questions or conversations that came up during that process, I'd welcome anyone to revisit that or highlight any of those if you feel compelled to. I know we've all spent a lot of time with the budget, but if there's anything you want to raise up.
Mr. Chairman, you want to point out the Financial Review Committee has reviewed
Mhm.
and signed off on. Is that-
Yes, they sent us a letter to that effect as well.
How much have we spent so far on Epic? What
We
was the
spent
first year, and what
probably-
was the second year?
Yeah, probably around $70 million to this point before we add in the 26 million that you'll be pretty
70 million?
Yeah,
That we spent so far?
already, correct.
Plus 100 million.
Out of the 100 million, and this will get us close to that 100 million. There will be an annual cost over the next 10 years of approximately
2 million.
2 million a year. But this takes about 95% of the capital cost and operations cost. This is the third phase the board approved 3 years ago for the implementation of Epic. Operationally, we're running 2 systems right now, or well, we're actually running lots of systems, but the old system and the new system are both live right now, and both take staff and costs to run both systems. Our plan is we go live with Epic November 1, and we plan on turning off the old legacy systems
June 30.
June 30th. So we're gonna have the expense the entire year.
The 2 systems.
Yes.
And we have, as you recall, we have went live on the physician module of Epic on May 1. Very successful, and again, I'm happy to report that we actually exceeded revenue for both May and June from our physician practices on revenue capture. So you don't normally see that on a go live. Just,
That is actually quite odd.
Would it, I saw, I think Dave's in the room, could we, maybe in a board meeting between now and November, maybe get an updated report on where we stand and how things are going?
And I do have to say, I've got a great IT team. And, I mean, obviously, they didn't do it by themselves. It was a team effort with the clinicians, the physician services did an amazing job of getting everything. But I do have to, as Dave is our Chief Information Officer, he did a tremendous job. And it way exceeded my expectation on the first phase go on. So I did want to acknowledge him tonight as well.
Yeah, I would also echo that, because it's been very commendable. I think the Epic installation so far has been an epic success for our citizens.
Really, puns.
I had to say it.
Too many puns, please.
It's low hanging fruit.
I have a question. Could you just speak a little bit to where are the biggest risks of a major swing or overrun in the budget?
Yes. The budget is based on the rules and regulations associated with the Affordable Care Act as we know it today. Based on our initial interpretation of both the House and the Senate version, there's no immediate changes that are material that we believe today will impact the budget. However, though that final bill has not been approved. So if there is some material change also to what we've assumed on the reimbursement part, we would bring that back to the board. On the growth strategies, as I mentioned earlier, 10% growth is a huge increase, and you have to have your throughput working correctly, you have to have all your strategies in place, et cetera. And then, so that would be the second risk. And then I think the last risk is we do have a lot of capital expansion going on, and to be able to manage all those, to stay on time, on budget, and then not lose focus on the day-to-day operations is a very easy thing to do to get out of whack if you're not moving forward. And so I would put those in those 3 categories.
Actually, you're,
Mrs. Demi, you're absolutely right. As I look upon other hospitals in Tennessee and across the country, hospitals budgeting an additional 10% growth on top of all the growth that we have experienced is a very difficult bar to meet. Usually in healthcare, you're budgeting approximately 3%. That would kind of be the standard. For us to be 10%, I know we're leading every hospital in Tennessee's organic growth. But that's, even if you look nationally, 10% to actually put in a budget, that's the budget. not even to exceed the budget, is probably higher than probably 99% of the hospitals in the country. So this is a very aggressive budget. I don't want to have anybody, and especially the people who actually have to implement it, it's a very aggressive budget. What we didn't account for is any legislative changes, any really shift in the market. As you know, we have very intelligent and well-funded partners in this community, and they could respond in a different way. Acquisitions can have that. Has nothing to do with what we're doing, but those are always real possibilities. So there's considerable risk in this budget, but we've reviewed it. We went through our positions, we went through our management team, and we believe this is a budget we can achieve.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question, though, to something, Britt, you mentioned that sparked, it's the capital projects. Could you maybe just describe for us, like, what is the process that we take to actually oversee the entirety of the capital projects? Because I know each one has their own team, but also I know there's ongoing review and control, but maybe just give a little more detail there.
Sure, it starts at the very beginning when we get in the planning process of getting our stakeholders involved. And the stakeholders would be our physicians, our end users. They help develop that capital request and develop the pro formas, all the risks that could happen that's associated with it. And then as we move forward and implement that project, we have a monthly review of where we stand regarding deadline of occupancy, when we're supposed to occupy it, as well as where we are on costs. And if there is any projected cost overruns, we try to get in there early and try to mitigate those. And I'm happy to say that we've not had any major material overruns in quite a while on any of our projects. So I think that we have a very intense team, and as you mentioned, we have actually team members that are assigned responsibilities for that. Once a project is open, then we actually monitor it against the pro forma to ensure that we are not, some of our assumptions that we used were correct, and then if something we've missed, we're off, we try to adjust it accordingly. So it really is this is an in-depth review of those projects and then a monitoring after the fact.
Great, thank you.
Any of these capital projects that run over $1 million, you'll come back to the board for approval on them?
No, once you approve these, they will approve. Now, if they go over the budget $1 million, that's beyond, we can authorize $1 million over, but if they go over $1 million unbudgeted, then that's when it comes back to the board.
Right, so anything that's unbudgeted, that my authority is everything up to $1 million, that is not budgeted. If it exceeds $1 million, those projects, new projects, we will bring to the board. Everything that's embedded in this budget, delineated in the budget, does not have to come back.
And that's also similar for any operating expense that's not budgeted, that's $1 million, that would have to come back to the board for approval as well.
Would you mind walking us through a little bit on the salary increases or additional salaries that you're going to be paying this next year?
Yeah, we have budgeted, starting the first school pay period in January, a market adjustment for all of our employees, and the annual cost of that market adjustment is around $7 million. And we, at this point, project no material changes in the benefits section of the employees' portion of those benefits. So the market adjustment for those salaries will all be a net cash to the employee.
And that's all employees.
It's all employees, that is correct. Last year, if you remember, we gave the market adjustment primarily to the nurses because when we did the review of market salaries, the nurses were way behind and we had to do a catch-up. But we believe now that the nurses are in market, so this adjustment will be to the nurses and all other employees. And that'll be effective the first full pay period in January.
I'm not trying to make the silence awkward, I'm just trying to give everybody plenty of time.
When we emailed out the budget to the board members yesterday or the day before, I noted in here that there was going to be roughly a 5% increase in your charges, your rates for this next year.
That is correct, at 4.9%, because we're limited, we can't go over 5-hour contract, or payer contracts. Most of the only people that will really affect, because if you're covered in private insurance or Medicare or Medicaid, those rates, we're already bound by contracted rates for everyone. So those would only impact those people that are self-pay patients, and that the state law requires us to discount those charges by over 50%. So really, in essence, when you look at that, plus some of the commercial payers, we have what is called stop-loss contracts, that when a patient's been here a long, long time, once it goes over a threshold, our contracts convert to a percent of charge payment, and so that would bring in some additional revenues there. But the total additional revenues for that charge increase is less than $1 million.
So what you're saying, if a person stays longer than the insurance pays, they'll pay a percentage?
Yes, the insurance company will, not the patient, but the insurance company will pay. And once they reach that threshold. And that really protects the hospital from those unusual circumstances when you have patients in here for a significantly long period of time.
Do we lose money in those situations, Brett, or do we break even or make money?
It varies depending on the individual state. So you can make some money on some and you can lose some money on some, just depending on the particular problem with the patient.
What effect does this have on the rates that other hospitals charge?
Most hospitals do around a 5% increase, so we're doing what is industry average. And we actually compare our charges through a database to benchmarks. You can't actually do it from hospital to hospital, because obviously that's price setting, but we do compare it to a regional benchmarking system. But keep in mind that those charges that's a lot of times reported is not what people actually pay, because all those are set by the insurance contracts. You can, whether you're charging $1,200 or $1,500 for a procedure, the contract says you'll pay $700. So I can increase that charge all day long, but the contract says that the payment's going to be $700. So I just have to write off that difference based on the contractual language. So really, gross charges, and that's why about 6 years ago, the accounting organization the guidelines that we had to follow eliminated us having to put gross charges on your audited financial statements. If you'll notice on your audited financial statements, it starts with net revenue, because gross charges no longer mean a whole lot.
Move to approve the budget as presented.
A motion to approve, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor of approving the budget for this year?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you, Mr. Tabor and the team. I know it takes to put that thing together.
I mean, the team did a really good job.
That's a beast. We will now move on to our next resolution, which comes from Ms. Stanley.
Yes.
And
Mrs. Stanley, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to step out to this part, but I just want to thank the board and the medical staff for the opportunity to stay here at Erlanger and re-engage for a long-term commitment, and I appreciate you considering this.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so colleagues, what we'll do tonight is we consider a new contract for Mr. Spiegel. Something wrong, Jack? Sorry?
I'm just wondering about the presentation.
Yes.
Okay, cool, sorry.
Okay.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. Okay. All right, so We're considering a new 5-year contract for Mr. Spiegel, and the way we'll move forward with that tonight is in 3 parts. So first, I'll just give you a little bit of background for the whole process. I think everybody was involved in some way, shape, or form, but just to recap so that we're all clear on what we did. Second, I'll invite Tony Dolby, who's a senior partner at Integrated Health Services, which is a part of Arthur Gallagher. Many of you now know her very well. They're our external compensation consultants, and she is actually going to take us through a presentation to kind of give us the context for how and why we've landed where we've landed with MBEC in terms of the proposals in the contract. And then third, I'll come back and just highlight some of the biggest changes that are taking place in the contract. You all received a draft of it in your board materials. I know it's long. I know it can be hard to tell what's different from current, so I'll take on the responsibility of trying to shepherd us through that. And of course, you know, whenever you have questions or comments, you know, we'll take those as we go. Okay? Sound good? All right, so the process that we used, actually, we met more as MBEC in the last 10 months than we ever have in my entire time on the board, and that's been almost 8 years. So I really want to thank all of the committee members who showed up for 6 committee meetings that were all public and open. So there were some times where we had members of the public there. We had associates from Erlanger show up. We had trustees come in, obviously, even if you weren't on the committee. So I really appreciate that. I think we averaged something like 13 or 14 attendees to a committee meeting, which typically has just like 4 or 5 of us sitting around the table. So I do really appreciate that and the attention that was given. I want to take this moment to acknowledge 2 people who aren't with us today that, for me personally, were trusted counselors in this entire process and brought a lot of wisdom to it. Tom Ed Wilson, as a member of the committee, was right there the entire way through, and I think one of the things I most appreciated about him was he always had the voice of the community. You know, how is what we're doing going to actually benefit the community, going to benefit patients, and I really appreciated that push he brought. And then Rick Youngblood, as a CEO himself, now rolling off the board, always gave us the perspective of how would a CEO likely view what we're getting ready to do, and if I were in Mr. Spiegel's shoes, how would I think about this? And so I really appreciated his counsel as well. So 6 MBEC committees, several discussions with the executive committee. Between each of those meetings, Tony and I met sometimes to talk about data. There were times Jack, other members of the executive committee, or MBEC were in the room, and so there's a lot of work that was going on in between, which is part of the reason why it took a long time. It also took a long time because we wanted to be, of course, really thoughtful about what we were doing and explore different options. So a pretty thorough process. With that, I will let Tony come up here. We'll get her presentation up on the screen, and we'll get going.
Well, they're getting that set up. I want to go backwards, and I did get an email from Linda Mossmines about the budget, and I know she can't vote on it, but she did want to be on the record as being in support of the budget. I forgot to mention that, so sorry.
There we go. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for your time, and this has been a process, and I appreciate all the work that all of you have put into this. We started working with Erlanger about 9 months ago or so, beginning last September, to talk about the CEO compensation and what the structure should look like, who should we compare the organization to. So our first discussions really centered around who should we compare your organization to. And we started by looking at all not-for-profit healthcare organizations in the country. We then brought that group down to organizations of similar size to Erlanger. Our general rule of thumb is to compare organizations as small as half your net revenue size to as large as 2 times your size. And then we tailor that group to make sure that it's organizations that are similar to Erlanger. So wherever possible, we looked at multi-hospital systems, but systems whose hospitals are in a relatively small geographic area, whether that's one city or one region. And we looked at both not-for-profit organizations and public hospitals, with physician groups. So that brought us to a group of about 72 organizations. As part of that tailoring of the group, we also eliminated organizations in very high cost of living areas. So we don't have hospitals and health systems in New York City or Washington, D.C., San Francisco, et cetera, to make sure that we're looking at as much as we can similar organizations. We do look at a national peer group because frankly, in today's world, if you were going to hire a new CEO, you certainly wouldn't limit yourself to one state or one region. And if you were going to lose a senior executive, they would be looking nationally for their other opportunities. We did bring to the committee, though, Tennessee data as a reference point, and we'll be showing you that data as well. So that gave us the peer group to compare Mr. Spiegel's compensation to. It's also very important that when we look at compensation, we look at total compensation, not just salary, not just incentive compensation or benefits, but all the components together, because every organization structures their programs somewhat differently. But the IRS, if you're ever audited, and the comparators done today are really around total compensation. So all of the data that we provided to the committee was all of those pieces of the compensation put together. You have a compensation philosophy that says you're going to pay at approximately the 50th percentile for salaries, or within a 50th percentile range. So we developed that range of the 50th percentile, looking at your current revenue, and you've grown tremendously. The performance of this organization, as I look at the data that we've gathered from you and from outside sources, is it's pretty spectacular what's happened over the last 5 years or 4 years or so. So your revenue has grown quite a bit. We looked at the current revenue, and so today the 50th percentile is approximately $886,000 or so. The committee is recommending a salary of $900,000, which is slightly below the 60th percentile of your peer group. His current salary is around the 25th or 30th percentile. So he's quite low compared to the marketplace today with his current salary. And the $900,000 would bring his salary to approximately the 60th percentile, or slightly below the 60th percentile.
Can I pause you there for a moment, because there's two other data points that I can't see that I want folks to understand on this one. This salary change was actually approved last November in MBEC, and normally we would have come straight to the board to hold a board vote on the salary change. That would be normal procedure in terms of years past, and then it would be made retroactive to the start of the fiscal year. It's just we're waiting for both audited financials as well as Mr. Spiegel's performance review. But at the time, we opted not to bring it before the board because we wanted to do it in connection with the broader contract and other elements of a contract that we may be negotiating. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that. Also, just to give a little bit of context for why the current one is so low. When we brought Mr. Spiegel in, he was an untested CEO from the perspective of managing multiple hospitals. He was just running one hospital. So we intentionally started him back in 2013 at a much lower and quite frankly very far below kind of market median rate for CEOs, with the thought at the time that if performance warrants it, each year MBEC can address a salary increase. And so that's what we've been doing as we move kind of year to year.
And that's a pretty common approach. If somebody's new in a CEO role, you'd start fairly low and then move up to at least the median or somewhat above median based on performance over a period of years. So your process is certainly in line with what we'd see in the market. Couple that with the tremendous amount of growth you've had in your organization, so the peer organizations have changed somewhat from who you used originally. Okay. As I said, we also then look at total compensation. So currently you have a pay-for-performance plan in place for your executive team with very specific goals set for that program. Those goals are reviewed and approved by the committee, and they are intended to be stretched. So they are not in any way a give-me and are very much focused on continuous improvement and continuous growth in the organization. So those goals and that incentive plan is a pretty large portion of Mr. Spiegel's compensation and is at risk from year to year based on performance. So when we add that to the program, plus benefits, which would include all benefits paid by Erlanger, it doesn't include anything he might put in the 401k or what portion of the medical insurance he pays for, but to look at his benefits, then that gives us the total compensation. So we've compared total compensation, his current total compensation, if you hit target or on-plan performance on every goal within the annual incentive plan, he would have been at approximately $1.2 million. That would put him well below the 50th percentile, probably in the range of the 40th percentile. If you do not hit those goals, his total compensation would have been approximately the 25th percentile or less in the marketplace. And that's true today. With the new proposed program changes, and we'll talk about those in more detail in a minute, if he hits target on the incentive compensation, he'd be at $1.5 million. That is between the 50th percentile and the 75th percentile. But if you do not hit those goals, he would then be somewhat around approximately the 30th percentile or so. So he does have a fairly substantial portion of his compensation at risk. There's another portion of his compensation as we talk about the details of the contract that are at risk for his staying with the organization. He would only get these dollars if he stays with the organization, a portion if he stays for 3 years, and another portion if he stays for 5 years. In order to value that, we've taken 1/3 or 1/5 of those dollars and added it into this number, but he only gets those at the end of those periods. So it's a little bit misleading, but that's the best way to compare market data to the peer group data to his compensation. So these are annualized amounts that wouldn't necessarily be paid in any 1 year.
And to be clear, it's misleading in that it's more.
Yes, it's more, yes. We're making this looks higher than what we'll show next year because he won't get a portion of those dollars unless he stays for 5 years, and then he'd get 5 years of this number. So he's going to look lower than this for the next 4 years, and then he'll look, assuming he's still here and in good standing, he'll look higher in the 5th year because he'll get that payout. Okay, but again, based on performance, he would be somewhere between the 50th and the 75th percentile, depending on how the goals, the performance of the goals shake out. This, I think, is very much in line with what we typically see in the market. To be honest, if Mr. Spiegel left and you had to hire a new CEO that had any experience at all, you'd probably be having to pay more than this. The salary especially, you'd probably have to set higher than what we're recommending here, just because the marketplace is quite volatile. Average tenure for CEO today is about 3.8 years. Huge amount of turnover, and that is a very costly endeavor, both in loss of strategic initiatives and performance in the organization, but also the cost just to get a new executive hired today is pretty substantial. So the intention here is to put together a program that's focused on performance, but also focused on retention. So as you look at that number, about 40% of that total compensation number is at risk in one way or another, either for the incentive goals or for the retention. The major changes, do you want me to start with these, Jen?
Maybe we'll pause and ask
Yeah.
if people have questions up until this point.
Yes, so have the goals to achieve total changed, or are they pretty much the same?
The incentive goals for next year have not been presented and approved yet. That'll happen in the next couple of months. And you're not all the way through the end of this fiscal year, so we don't yet know how performance will play out in the incentive goals. But each year, those goals are reviewed and approved by the committee.
And they come before.
And then they come before the full board.
And those are the ones we move from
Right, yeah.
how much are quality versus financial versus other that we look at every year.
And as I've looked at the history of your goals, historically, you've been somewhat above the 50% of that incentive plan was based on financial performance. As your financial performance has improved, you've moved to less weighting on the financial performance, enough to make sure you're still focused on it, to more goals around quality, community, patient satisfaction, et cetera, with the caveat that if you lose money, even if you hit the maximum on every one of the goals, the incentive plan does not pay. You've also moved to expecting and requiring third to fourth quartile performance in each of those categories. So paying at the 60th, 75th percentile, requiring that level of performance in the organization in order to pay.
So over the last several years, what percentage of the at-risk dollars have been paid out on average?
Greg,
Greg,
give us some specifics on that.
Generally speaking, over the past 2 or 3 years, in and around target or slightly less than target, typically has been our achievement level over the past 2 or 3 years.
Prior to
So
that, it
there's
was
3
less.
levels. Actually, the reason why it's not as straightforward of an answer is because there's 3 levels. There's baseline, there's target, and there's stretch. And so
Right.
some of the goals we meet at target, some of the goals we might meet at stretch, and some we might not meet at all. So we look at the total pool, and I think, what was it, 2-point-something million in the pool for incentives last year?
If you meant stretch on everything,
Yeah.
it would be about 4 million.
4, right, but the target was
Yeah, the
about
target
half
was
that then.
about 2.8.
Yes, and we made, if I recall, the majority of that. So we can look up the exact percentage, but it was the majority, but not all.
And that plan includes the
That's the whole plan.
executives as
Yeah.
well as
Yeah.
That's it.
managers
Not
and
just the
Yeah.
CEO.
directors, et cetera.
That's actually, I think, an important distinction, so thanks for asking about that, because some plans, if I understand correctly, Tony, they do something differently for the CEO than they do for other members of the management team. And I think for years, we've held the philosophy that you need to be in it together with the team, and you kind of live and die as a team. And that wouldn't change.
And that's true. I mean, and you have, I think, a more inclusive plan, which I commend, in that you go down further into the organization. Almost everybody has a plan for their vice presidents and above. Then you go to the directors, and that's probably maybe a third of organizations have plans for the directors. You go a step further than that. So you're ahead of your peers in that you've got that kind of performance-based compensation further into the organization, which I think is great. And you actually have now extended that to all employees, that there is what we would refer to as a success sharing program that you have with all employees. So questions on the details, peer group? We do show, for anyone that's interested, this is Tennessee data. So this is from 990s. 990s are public documents. The 990 data is slow to get published. So this is from 2014 for most organizations. That's the most recent 990s. The 15s are starting to come out. As you can see here, Kevin's compensation currently was about the middle of the market of the Tennessee organizations. But Erlanger's much larger than most of the organizations on this list. And a lot of these hospitals are subsidiary hospitals. Here's the list of the organization. They're subsidiary hospitals within a system, and that's a very, very different job. You don't have the responsibility for dealing with Wall Street and bond covenants and all of those sorts of things that are done by the system office. You don't have the same level of responsibility for human resources or accounting or EPIC costs, et cetera. So a subsidiary hospital president has a very different job than a health system president. And you can see the revenue is somewhat smaller than Erlanger as well. And we're comparing Kevin's current compensation, so 2016 compensation at Target to 2014 990 data. But this is people are usually interested in what's happening around you. In Chattanooga, item C, Number C is Memorial, but they're substantially smaller than you and of course part of CHI, so a very different job. With the proposed compensation, he'd be at about the 75th percentile of the Tennessee peer group, again, comparing to 2-year-old Tennessee data, which would have certainly gone up as well.
Is St. Jude in that group?
I'm sorry?
Is St. Jude Hospital in that group?
They don't publish a 990.
Are these all
structured.
public hospitals?
No, these would be all not-for-profit hospitals. Brady, for example, is a public hospital.
So all of them are not public hospitals?
They're not public, they're all not-for-profit, but not
Okay.
public. Any questions that I can answer on that data? Okay, do you want, Jen?
Yeah, let's talk about the recommended revisions, and I'll join Tony up there for this one. Maybe you can walk us through,
Sure.
and I can give a little bit of the details as well.
So these are the major changes to the employment agreement. I will tell you, there's lots of little language changes and things like that that we've worked with outside counsel, with Jeff, and with our counsel. But these are the provisions that are really the primary changes. The first is that the agreement would be effective, if assuming you approve it, would be effective today for July 1 date. It's a 5-year agreement. The salary would be increased to $900,000. As Jennifer pointed out, that would be back to July 1 of 2016. Compensation would be reviewed annually as it has been in the past and compared to the peer group market data for consideration.
Let me clarify one thing there, I think is important. It's reviewed annually, but there's no obligation
Right.
for it to go up or down.
Correct.
Okay. So some contracts have automatic ratchets, but this is truly reviewed.
That's close enough. So we'll review it like we always do in the fall as a part of the annual CEO review. So that'll happen
Just
October,
clarify.
November timeframe.
But there is no guarantee, there's no cost of living increase, automatic increase type language in the contract, just that it will be reviewed annually. There is a supplemental retirement plan in place. Pension plans only allow for compensation up to $270,000 to be included in calculating retirement benefits. And so almost every not-for-profit healthcare organization does have some sort of supplemental plan for their executive team. And you have a plan currently that provides 12% of salary that vests only if Kevin stays for 3 years. Then the next year's contribution, he'd have to stay 3 years to get. We're recommending that change from 12 to 15% of salary. The market norm is closer to probably 18 to 20%. So this would be still a little bit on the conservative side, but an increase from what's in place currently. As we met.
Can I pause on that one,
Yeah.
because I want maybe for a little bit of context for our colleagues on that one too. The reason why we went lower than, or on the low end of what we saw in the benchmark class as well is because it is an additional benefit, but it's just related to his staying. It's not necessarily related to performance, and we wanted to keep kind of this balance of, I call it the 60-40 balance. So at target performance, 60% of his compensation would be fixed components, something like that. And the other 40% is all at risk, which is a highly leveraged plan for a hospital CEO. So there's a bit of kind of the mixing and matching that goes on with these different elements to achieve both meeting some kind of market norm or benchmark and our goals of what we're trying to achieve on performance.
Okay. As we met, one of the primary conversations was around how do we encourage Kevin to stay with the organization for at least the next 5 years. So we talked about putting in a retention incentive that pays if and only if Kevin stays with the organization for that 5-year period. So there is again, keeping in mind this balance that Jennifer just talked about, how much can we put into a retention incentive that he gets if and only if he stays for that 5-year period. So if he decides to retire early at 63 or something like that, and he's not hit the 5 years, even though it's a retirement, he would still not get these dollars. It pays at the end of 5 years, or if he was, if he died or was disabled, his beneficiaries would get the prorated amount.
And maybe before we get into the discussions of for cause and without cause, which I think is a really important discussion for the board to have, one of the ways as we were thinking about these retention incentives, it automatically prompted a much longer, healthier debate around what is without cause or for cause, given the history that we've had in this particular, Erlanger's history on this particular issue. We wanted to be sure that if we were putting in place retention incentives, we had to feel comfortable as a board that we would also take action if performance wasn't what we wanted to see, and that we had the contract worded appropriately such that, what pays out and what doesn't pay out would be clear to anybody reading it. So that played into the without and for cause discussions.
In the event of an involuntary termination without cause, so you decide he's no longer a fit for the organization, or you merge with another organization and you don't need a CEO anymore, are just a couple of examples, but this is very much without cause. Not that he quits voluntarily or that you let him go for cause. He would receive 24 months of his salary and medical insurance benefits for that for 2 years. 2 years is in both our survey data as well as your previous consultant and other published data. 24 months for a CEO is the median level of severance. So you started with 18 with him. As Jennifer pointed out, he had not been a proven CEO. Now that he has proven himself to the organization, we're suggesting that be increased to the median, which is 24 months. Definition for cause. It's always a difficult definition to arrive at. There are standards and norms, and we attempted to get as close as we could to that norm. So it is conviction of a felony or crime that is involving moral turpitude. That's always an interesting conversation to have, is the definition of moral turpitude.
And we did have it.
And there is a definition?
Yes, there is actually a definition in
Which are,
the
we had
employment.
external counsel review it, they noted that that's interesting that we actually defined that.
Because if you look it up, there is no definition. And frankly, moral turpitude is different in different cultures and in different organizations. The glaring example is probably very different in Las Vegas than it is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But we did define that. We also, of course, say the conviction of a felony or criminal offense, fraud or embezzlement, and willful failure to refuse to comply with reasonable directives of the committee or the board of directors. Now, this isn't one board member. It's the board's directives, but if you give him a directive that's legal and appropriate and he does not follow it, that would be considered termination for cause. In that instance, there is no severance. He would lose the retention incentive. He would lose the supplemental retirement benefit. Anything that's been earned, salary to the date of termination, his 401k balances, et cetera, you can't legally take those away. But any of those other dollars that are at risk at all would not be paid.
Mr. Chair. How do you define serious criminal offense? Or do we define, for example, is a DUI, is that considered a serious criminal offense? Is a domestic assault considered a serious criminal offense?
Those are, I think, specifically listed. Actually, we decided not to specifically list, because if we did, that list could never be all-inclusive. But in conversations, both internally amongst the committee members and with the attorneys and with Kevin, those would both be considered serious criminal offenses.
I think the idea, Gerald, was anything less than a felony that the board deemed serious. And as a criminal attorney, you have it probably have a different opinion than other folks do, but the idea was to get those misdemeanors that rose to a level of seriousness that would impact his ability to govern or the board's ability to allow him.
Well, and like, for instance,
And-
domestic violence, domestic assault. I mean, I would vehemently argue that that is both a serious criminal offense and moral turpitude.
But it's not a felony.
But
It's
it
not
may
a
not be
felony,
a
but
felony.
it definitely.
DUI is not a felony.
Right.
It's not.
But in my opinion, it should be dismissal of the CEO who did that.
Well, let me ask you this, and I don't know, this may be contemplated in it as well, because I've been a prosecutor and I'm a criminal defense attorney now, and I also understand the fact that a lot of charges, a lot of individuals who get charged with offenses are not ultimately convicted of those offenses. So does this kick in at the charge, or does this kick in at conviction? Have you had that?
It's conviction of a
It
felony
is the
or
conviction.
criminal offense. Often what you'd find, let's take domestic violence as an example, if somebody was charged with domestic violence, they probably would be suspended, but not dismissed until the conviction or dismissal of the charge. When we talked about things like adultery, would that fall under moral turpitude? And we went down the path of starting having examples of, is it adultery if your spouse is in a nursing home for 20 years and you start dating? That's probably different than you're having an affair with your secretary. So we tried not to get into the specific examples in the document. They are somewhat open-ended and may end up in discussion or arbitration, but Jeff, I don't know, we can add more language, but.
Well, let me, actually.
Yeah, let's not, yeah.
Let me give a little more context here, because if anything took the longest to hammer out for the last 9 to 10 months, it was this. And we received external counsel guidance, Jeff's guidance. Actually, Tony and Jeff went out to benchmark for-cause clauses in other CEO contracts. So this kind of reflects something that we thought would give us a little bit more leeway, hence why we didn't define serious criminal offense with a list. So that was one. The second piece was, or the second thing maybe just to bring to your attention, we did actually, for all of these phrases, go through, Jeff, you'll remember this, the conversation quite specifically of examples like what Tony was just sharing of, well, does this really mean it? Does that really mean it? And I think in the end, one of the, I thought, very helpful conversations we had in MBEC, and I'm reflecting on, I think it was Rick's comment, was we have to be willing to be serious as a board with the very last phrase, because we could actually direct behavior of the CEO if we found that he was behaving in a way, Phil, to your point, that rose to the level of moral turpitude, or if we felt like, we think a DUI is a serious offense, you better take these 5 or 6 following actions. So that's actually what gives it the teeth here, is us having the ability to communicate clearly to him something that if he can resolve it, he does, and if he can't, then we would move forward accordingly.
I'm sorry, I was just going to point out one detail in the contract itself. Instead of willful failure, it's employee's failure. So where that indicates willful
yeah, we
failure
don't
or
just-
refusal,
multiple
it's
iterations.
yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't mean to be, and I really don't mean to be a stickler for this, but I guess I've had experience with dealing with an issue on for-cause termination. And we had that sort of language in their serious criminal offense. And you had a divisional vice president who went to a concert and got drunk at the concert, got arrested for public intox, disorderly conduct, and said and did some things. Those are C misdemeanors. Those are the lowest possible. It's the same thing in the law as a speeding ticket. But it caused so much embarrassment to the organization that it was difficult for that person to continue to lead that division. And they made the argument that it was not a felony or a serious criminal offense. is the lowest level criminal offense that you could possibly be
Could it
charged
be
with.
considered moral turpitude?
It was all up for argument. And we got sued over it basically.
Okay.
And we lost.
To be clear, we would probably get sued regardless.
Yeah.
Like, that's
No
just.
matter what language we put.
Yeah.
That's true.
And we have
Gray area.
been, by the way.
These
These two that I've been here, I remember voting against, I remember that, because I remember I voted.
No, Gerald, your point is very well made.
Yeah. And we struggled with this, as every organization does. As Jennifer pointed out, we went to numerous, I probably looked at 50 different not-for-profit healthcare, including as many public health system language as I could. And this was the most consistent. You're right, it's never going to be all-inclusive, and if anything's going to bring you to lawsuits and suing, it's going to be a determination for cost.
Joe, just to point out, to Jennifer's point, this is sausage, right? This is the negotiation of, when we started out, the original agreement was pro-employer. It was crystal clear. The board could take action in any number of situations, very much pro-authority. So the idea here was to find some middle ground that allowed the board flexibility, not shirking its fiduciary duties, but also respectful of the idea that it needs to be serious when it happens. And again, as they pointed out, it was product of negotiation.
Is there anything in here in terms of a suspension, being accused of criminal conduct, criminal action? You talked about perhaps a suspension until there was a conviction. Do we know, or have we discussed whether that suspension would be a paid suspension or an unpaid suspension?
That's not.
It's not.
It's not.
Do we have any policies for other employees in the organization on that?
We do have some policies, based on where they work, who they're interacting with, what type of patients they may be interacting with, and if we suspend, some may be with pay initially, and then it moves into a period without pay. So it's contingent on the circumstances and where the individual actually works.
Got it. And my understanding, so please correct me if I'm wrong, like, let's say, we have a sexual harassment policy. Kevin is covered by that policy
That's
as an
correct.
employee of Erlanger. So whatever, whatever would kick in as a result of potentially engaging in that kind of behavior is already covered by the policies of the organization, which is another reason why we didn't have to try to cover every single thing in the contract. We did check with the ones
Which,
that
as I just pointed in a sidebar to Gerald, in section 2B, it spells out specifically that Kevin will
Section
adhere
2.
to those policies.
Yeah. It was always tough.
So those are the major changes in the contract.
We had a quick question here.
I just wanted to ask Jennifer,
Yep.
how is poor performance dealt with?
So
If
poor,
he-
poor performance in terms of, like, we don't hit our financial goals, or quality and patient care isn't what we'd
Yeah,
like
it all
it to
falls
be.
apart.
Yeah, that's where severance kicks in, right? So there is a piece of this, which is if the poor performance is a result of something where we have said, take action and fix this, and he has not taken action to fix it, that's part of what we're trying to cover in the last phrase of the for-cause language, or the for-cause language. But if we just sort of get to a point where, like, we don't really like the direction it's going in, he's not doing as well as we thought he would be doing, we really need it, we want him to go, and we want someone else to come in, that is the whole reason why severance exists for CEOs, is because of that very real possibility. Which is not a fun thing, I mean, it's
No,
not
we
a
hope
fun
we
thing
never
to
get
think
there.
about, but.
Yeah.
If it's willful poor performance, he quits coming to work, then he's not following the directives of the board, and that would be for cause. But-
So let me give the board maybe an example with a little, that's real for Erlanger, some of you will remember. There was a period of time under a previous CEO where Erlanger was performing incredibly poorly. Operationally, patient satisfaction, quality, financially, you name it, across the board. And the board gave the CEO some very specific directives of things to do. And I remember one of them was, it sounds simple, but one of them was, we want you to carry out a physician satisfaction survey, because we need to hear from the doctors directly what it is that are the problems in the organization, and that CEO refused to do it. So that triggered, in some minds of the board, a for cause, a willful failure, or employee did not, do what they were asked to do. But others thought that it didn't. So we actually ended up having to take that to a vote of whether or not severance would get paid out, and in that case, severance got paid out. But that's the kind, I can imagine that's the kind of situation that we could potentially be having a debate about if, poor performance continued for an extended period of time. So it's just not, it's not black and white as much as we would like it to be.
No matter what we do, there will be a lawsuit.
Probably so. That's a
But
good
it just
point.
seems like the more detailed you would get, with what you say, the kind of the easier the case would be.
But it also goes the other way.
Yeah.
If you have a list of things you can't do,
And you miss
what if you
something.
leave something off?
Yeah.
Well, what if you leave off hacking computers because we don't think Kevin can hack computers? Well, now that's not on the list. And so you actually get yourself in an opposite problem sometimes if you list everything and leave something off.
We actually debated this at length. I want to just add something to Jack's point, which was if you go to the effort of trying to create a long list, it actually makes it look like you have contemplated every possible circumstance. So if that circumstance that arises is not on the list, it can often be assumed that the board must have contemplated it and decided not to put it on the list because you have this really long bulleted list of other things. And so that's what kind of moved us back into the world of trying to get the most serious things in there, but leave room for some, yeah, thank you.
That's where I've traditionally seen language included but not limited to.
Can be, but, yeah. I'm telling you, CEO contracts are a bizarre beast.
I'd review a section, sorry.
Questions?
Are we going over any more of the contract?
No,
We can go
unless
whatever
people
you-
have
we can
questions
go over
about.
whatever you want.
Did we leave in the contract the hire clause?
I'm sorry?
The hire clause, that if he leaves, he cannot?
Yes.
No, the way it reads now is if he leaves, he cannot solicit anyone to come work.
For how long a period?
2 years.
Okay.
That's the way it reads now?
He cannot, so there's a lot in there. He can't compete within a certain amount of,
2 year period.
certain many miles. Can't do,
Yeah.
can't solicit anybody to leave for 2 years.
Non-disparagement.
Non-disparagement.
Non-
That one goes both ways, so he
Yeah.
can't disparage us, we can't disparage him. That seems right. Yeah, all that ties to the 2-year period.
Good. Should be in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's some things we haven't called out because they're sort of standard, like around indemnification and things like that, but happy to.
Yeah, and like if there's a lawsuit where it happens, Tennessee.
Mediation. Right.
Now, you indicated that it included the buyout, the 2-year pay, also included fringe benefits, right?
Only medical insurance?
No pension?
No pension for that 24 months that he's on severance. Anything that's already in his pension, you can't take
All right, how
away.
about vacation pay?
Only vacation pay that he's earned prior to termination.
Okay, so that's included then.
You can't take it away.
Everything up to the date
Okay.
of
Okay.
dismissal.
Yeah, that's all considered to
But
be
he obviously
earned
can't
and
get
accrued.
there's no incentive compensation or bonus,
Right.
incentive pay for those 2 years either.
Right.
Is-
Not during the 2 years, just up to the point. of-
Up to the point,
Up to
sure.
the point of
But
termination.
after that, it's
Right.
just base.
Yeah. I think there's something in there too, like, there's some money for outplacement services and,
Is it $20,000?
$20,000, yeah, as well.
And Tony, I remember, this is sort of the more common thing that happens, right, when CEOs are transitioning is, let's just say it's time to go.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's usually a combination of whether you don't fit culturally or you're going in a different direction and that person doesn't fit in that new direction and people are let go and severance is typically paid then. There also is the non-compete, so if he leaves and competes during the severance period, severance would end.
Jennifer, the problem that you experienced the last time, where the board disagreed about performance, how would we prevent that from happening again? Is it a matter of educating the board members on this aspect of the agreement?
That's a
Or-
fantastic question. reflecting on that experience, I'm not sure that it's ever 100% preventable. I think my experience with all of you and in the boards of the recent years is that the education is quite helpful, but then actually sitting down and having the discussions, in that instance, I think it would have been helpful to actually have had a motion and made it official, what we are asking this person to comply with. I think that could have helped for sure mitigate that circumstance, such that even if people still disagreed or, were voting against it, there was at least, a clear record as opposed to just conversations with the executive committee.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, there actually is a provision in the agreement that if there is that point of disagreement, that you would submit in writing to him that we have asked you to do this, you have not complied, you have X number of days to comply, and if you don't, that will be considered termination.
But we would, as a board, would need to majority agree to whatever that is. So that, I think, would help because we'd at the outset have to agree to those standards. So any debate that would come after that wouldn't be about the standard we asked him to comply with. It would be more about did he do it, did he do it sufficiently? It's not fun.
Well, I know, but I'm
Hopefully you'll
just
never get in that situation.
wondering if there's some way we could, as a board, and then the executive committee also have some guidance about how to deal with these kinds of issues if they come up. I'd hate to see us find ourselves in a position of going through a long period of doing very badly, very poorly, having a lot of public concern about what we're doing, and then all of a sudden we're paying somebody to leave. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
We'd have to take action soon. We'd
Yeah,
have to.
that would be on us for allowing that prolonged period you talked about,
That's
for going to line. I will say this, if you step away from the details of this, on the one hand, this is a contract to indicate that we as a board want Kevin to be the leader and to have a commitment to this organization and a 5-year plan. On the one hand, there's that. On the other hand, I think this contract specifically, and this is one of our major jobs as a board, is to hire and fire CEOs. This puts some onus back on the board to do our job and be engaged and not wait a year to address issues, not wait 6 months to call Kevin to task if things go sideways. It absolutely will require this board as a body to act and act quickly and timely if things go pear-shaped.
But Harry, you raise a great point. I'm thinking on maybe the agenda of an upcoming MBEC, we actually have a longer conversation about getting guidance, from our attorneys. Like Gerald, it'd be great to have you there. Maybe even have an outside person come in and just tackle it from the perspective of governance and have a longer discussion about that. Thank you.
As we move into a more contemplative phase of this conversation, I do want to go ahead and let everybody know, given the nature of this and the fact that we have press here, this will most likely be a headline. We know how that happens. I am going to ask for a roll call vote tonight, so we'll go one by one, just so we're all on the record wherever we want to be on the record. We discussed that beforehand. I think that's the prudent thing to do. So I'm not calling for a vote now. I'm just letting everybody kind of prepare for that as we move through this conversation. It's by no means a done conversation. We'll have as many questions as we need to have.
How about this pay raise going to be retroactive? Why?
I'll tackle that one. So we voted on it actually back in November. So it has been, the pay raise has been in place and authorized since November. It just hasn't been paid out. So if we didn't want to pay it out, we'd actually have to go back and kind of unvote it, if that makes sense. And
Did
it's
the board vote for it?
It goes through MBEC, yep. And so on that particular thing, MBEC needs to vote and then advise the board. It always works that way, by the way, Phil, that it's generally retroactive because of the timing of the CEO's performance evaluation with when salary kicks in. So if we need to set salary for the next fiscal year, we're doing that while that fiscal year is already started because we're waiting for audited financials from the previous one, and we're also waiting for all of the performance reviews to come in that kick in like the August, September timeframe. So we would always make it retroactive and have always made it retroactive to start at the beginning of the year. So this is no different, it's just that we waited a really long time because we were trying to negotiate all other elements of the contract.
Jennifer, are CEOs always paid on a fiscal year basis? And then
For
everybody else is paid on a calendar year basis?
Not
That
necessarily.
one, yeah.
Not necessarily. Some organizations have the CEO compensation on the same calendar year as the other employees, most often calendar year. Some are on the anniversary of their hire date, and some are on the fiscal year. So there is no hard and fast answer to the.
Greg, have we always done it this way?
I would say in the recent past, more on a fiscal year basis than not. So with Kevin, it's been on a fiscal year basis since he's been employed, and Mr. Drexler, I believe, was also on a fiscal year basis.
What are you thinking? Like, do you think we would be better to shift it to calendar?
Well, I don't see any reason for it to be any different than anybody else, to be honest with you.
You know, why don't we give everybody else back the same thing?
If you started at January the 1st instead of July the 1st, that would put him on the same time period as everybody else.
It doesn't change the process for what we need to do to set this out.
It would fall in line with the process that we're
A
following.
little bit better. Good idea.
The incentive is based on your fiscal year performance, and you can't calculate the incentive without the audited financials, which is why I think it falls in that, with the fiscal, it's a fiscal year ended January, everything else would follow January. It's just because we're a government organization, we follow the state of Tennessee's budgeting process in the county and the city that we are in July.
But to be clear, we could, if we wanted to shift it, we could. We'd still have to follow the end of the fiscal year to figure out the incentive pay. And then the first time we did it, we'd have to cover the delta and the timing in some way, shape, or form, and then just, start the kick-in of the payout on January 1st.
But, yeah, and many
It's not a
organizations-
mathematical impossibility.
Right.
Yeah, it's doing some math. We end up in the same place.
Yes.
Quite often, you don't see the salary change and the incentive payment happening at the same time. So, that shouldn't direct.
We shouldn't feel obligated to keep it
Shouldn't feel
together.
obligated
Okay.
to keep it that way. Greg, when do other employees' comp salaries change?
More often than not, it's in January. If we're doing raises for all employees, we implement those in January.
Let me express my concerns. We're giving the CEO a double-digit pay raise. Last year, the rank and file employees of this hospital did not get a pay raise. The nurses did. And this year, we're giving them a 2% pay raise, which is a $7 million cost to the hospital. The 22 executives of this hospital, their combined salaries is $7 million. I'm concerned, and let me give you, in January 1 this year, the executives got pay raises. One got a $72,000 pay raise, another $62,000, another $54,000 pay raise. And this does not include incentives. These are heavy pay raises, but yet we're only giving the rank and file 2%. I think that's my number one concern, is we need to be helping those who touch the patients more than those who sit in the offices as executives. I think we're top-heavy with executives. And so I have a real concern about this. I have a real concern about an almost $2 million buyout. Our last CEO was 600-something thousand. Now we're jumping to almost 2 million. I think we're getting out of range, and I'm very concerned about it. You're awful quiet.
Other comments? Concerns?
I mean, I actually would echo Phil's comments to a degree, and why this is so hard, because it is so much money, right? Like, we can't get around that fact. And it is more money than anybody else here makes. It's more money than the average Chattanoogan makes. It's more money like I think most of us make. And it is this crazy sort of fact of CEO life. And so I always have this constant kind of refrain in my head of, you know, fighting the bigger battle of it really stinks that CEO pay has gotten out of whack, but also with my responsibility to make sure that we have like stability of good leadership at Erlanger and relying on, you know, the information that as best we can in as objective way as we can of what it takes to make that happen. And we land in a spot that never quite like makes anybody really happy, quite frankly, because of the amounts that we're talking about. And I think someone said to me something when I agreed to chair this committee, that, you know, you're always stuck kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't position with something like this, but you can never have a conversation about what is fair compensation, because fair is like a relative thing. But I do think, and this is where I agree with Phil, that when we're talking about how we think through rewarding the 6,000 plus associates that work at this organization, giving them a fairer shot at performance-based pay in the same way that we think about it for the CEO is something that we ought to be seriously turning our attention to. Because if people do well and they do right by the patients, they should have an opportunity to earn something beyond just wage rate increases. I would agree with you on that one.
I mean, I would agree as well on the concept of, as a board, what are we directing the executives to execute? And I think, you know, a renewed focus on, you know, we've moved this hospital from a position of relative weakness 6 years ago to a position of strength today. And how do we take that position of strength and make sure that the benefits of those efforts are spread more evenly? I think that's something we need to direct. If we as a board agree that that's a worthwhile thing to go after, I think we need to start directing management to do that. And I think that's what we're here for, and we can do that.
I think any good organization rewards everybody.
Absolutely.
For good results. We're not doing that at this hospital.
I would disagree with you that we're not doing it. I would say
We're trying to do it this year with a 2% pay rate.
Sure.
Which I commend them.
We can do better.
I'm for that.
We can do better, for sure.
I think we can. I think we can. You know, I sort of like in this situation too, you know, for people who watch basketball, I have a son who loves the Golden State Warriors. And he absolutely loves this team. I spent a ton of money for us to go see the Golden State Warriors play and have floor seats and because Stephen Curry.
You adopting kids right now?
No. And I said, you know, Stephen Curry is his favorite player. I think back to a couple of years ago, and they had Stephen Curry, and they had Draymond Green, and they had all of these players, but they couldn't win championships. And they were great players, but they couldn't win championships. And they had a good coach, but they couldn't win championships. And they didn't start winning championships until they got a great coach. So you had all the components, you had all the pieces in place, but you needed a Hall of Fame caliber coach to get them to their full potential and where they needed to be on the verge of setting another NBA dynasty. And I say that to say this. Like many of the people in this room, I was born and raised here in Chattanooga. My mother worked here. My aunt worked here for several years. Erlanger Hospital has not always enjoyed a great reputation for a variety of reasons. This is one of the first times in a long time that Erlanger is where it needs to be and is rapidly moving ahead. And it's doing that for a variety of reasons. The numbers that I've seen have not been smoke and mirrors. They've been real numbers. We are doing well because we are taking market share. We are doing well because we have a strategic vision that's allowing us to grow and move into areas that we've not moved into before. That comes, in my opinion, as a result of the management team and as a result of Kevin's vision and leadership. Now, that being said, there are people that work here in this hospital, there are nurses, there are people that come here every day who need to be compensated to the best of our ability to do so. The last time we had this conversation, I was the only member of the board who voted no. And I voted no simply because I thought Kevin would be a dynamic leader, but I did not see, he had not been here long enough for me to feel comfortable in voting for that type of contract and that type of pay raise. In the period of time that's passed since that vote, he has shown me some things that lead me to believe that he is definitely the right person for this job, and he is doing something that a lot of people could not do. There are things that do concern me, Phil. $2 million. I worked for someone at one time who told me that it's better to give people golden handcuffs. He'd rather give you golden handcuffs than give you a golden parachute. He wanted to make it so good for you to be there that you never even thought about leaving and what it would look like if you did leave. So I'm concerned about a couple of aspects of what we have going right now, but I believe we have a good coach for this team. I believe we have a Hall of Fame coach for this team, and I believe, and I want to work over the coming year with Phil and everyone else to make sure that we are doing everything that we possibly can for the people that are coming here every day, that are touching patients every day, that are greeting people when they walk through the door every day. That is important. That is this hospital's mission.
Yeah. So-
As always, at any time, I would entertain a motion, but feels like we might be moving towards that direction.
I'm the motion man tonight. I will make a motion to approve this compensation package as presented.
Have a motion? Do I have a second?
A second.
Kitty, would you do a roll call for us, please?
Phil Smart,
No.
Dr. Baxter,
Yes.
Mike Griffin,
Yes.
Henry Haas,
Yes.
Dr. Sizemore,
Yes.
Jennifer Stanley,
Yes.
Gerald Webb,
Yes.
I'm a yes as well. I'm a yes.
you want to vote?
I get to vote, don't I, Jeff? No, don't have to. I will. I will, yes. With that, the resolution passes, and I appreciate everyone, Phil, Gerald, everybody for a spirited conversation. I think that's the definition of what we're supposed to do as a board, so thank you all. We will now move on in the agenda. And thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. We knew this would be a long meeting, and I appreciate everyone giving us the time. This is important stuff. We have our normal informational items, and Britt will be available. Dr. Sizemore, is there a medical staff report this month?
Just continue to remind the board that the medical staff is working on a revision of its bylaws. We've sought independent counsel and plan to have that to move forward to the board here later this year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Shack had to leave. He said that they didn't have anything material to report, but I asked him if anything does come up to let us know. And now, Mr. Spiegel, do you have a CEO report for this evening?
I do not. I'm just going to talk to the board in executive session, but nothing to report.
Thank you very much. If we don't have any other reports from trustees or officers, I will, as I always do, point everyone to their upcoming meetings. And thank you again for your attendance at your committee meetings. That really is where we get a lot of work done, so thank you there. We will be, I don't want to get this wrong, where are we going, Greg?
E-Rock.
E-Rock. We are going across the hall to E-Rock for our credentialing session. With that, we are adjourned.